Time for another community discussion. This time, what makes good difficult content? How's it, everybody? Celtic Link here. We're back for another Dokkan battle video. In today's video, we have another community discussion. This time, we posed a bit of an interesting question to really get people thinking on what is difficult content when it comes to Dokkan, right? How fast is too fast when it comes to releasing new content, and what should that content look like? So we'll read through the question here, and we'll go through each one of your responses. Just like last time, I will read every response and reserve my final judgment for the end of the video, where I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on that matter. This is just a chance for you to get your voice heard on what you think about this. So the question this time is to get you thinking, right? In years past, difficult content was very sparse. Outside of a few SBRs and ESBRs, we were stuck with one or two major fights, that being the legendary Goku and Vegeta events. Then the Red Zone meta came in and ramped things up. In that time, we've seen both acceleration and stagnation at times of difficult content. Sometimes that acceleration has been so fast that units have aged. Units that released only a month prior have aged. Think of how, right, the units released just before Red Zone Broly were almost immediately aged out by Red Zone Broly, or how the majority of 2023 pre and post Merge Zamask was basically rendered irrelevant by how strong that stage was. Often, though, we find it moving a bit slower, where units are able to settle for a little over a year, right? So think like everyone posts Broly into Metal Cooler Core all the way up to Sin/Omega. All of those units were roughly in the same power. You could make them work in the events released during that time in one way or another without too much stress. So the question I ask is, what do you think of this year's batch of worldwide content, right? Is it too difficult, right? And to that or not difficult enough? And to that effect, how often should the next difficult fight be released? How fast is too fast, and how do you feel about power creep, both in terms of boss difficulty, right? Think the jump from 9th enemy to Tanabata, and in terms of unit power, right? That is the question. So this time we're going to go ahead and we're going to read through the comments from our Discord server first, because last time we didn't have enough time to get to them. So I want to make sure I honor them and get that first, right? So first response here is from Gogeta is Peak. He says the lack of difficulty is good here. We just went through two of the biggest, hardest content drops, to the point where too much plus the content feels great for showcases. I feel like older units are the main point of the celebration so far. Overall, the 10th annie doesn't really have hope the 10th annie doesn't really have big power creep. This is a really good point, right? From the global perspective, we got 9th anniversary content, which didn't necessarily age units more so as it did open up, but we really did see a massive jump in the power of bosses, right? Think that Gogeta's super to certain units is doing over 3 million, Beast Gohan's super over 2 million, right? This is a significant jump from where it was at Merge Zamask. And then on global, not even a month later, we got Super Saiyan Blue Evolution Vegeta fight. Now, we didn't get the Goku Frieza fight, but that's coming here really quickly. So I think it's important. I think Gogeta's Peak here brings up an excellent point. We have to remember what global just went through, right? If we had another stage that was beyond those two stages for global, I mean, imagine how it would feel someone who just spent on 9th anniversary and basically being able to use none of your units. That's kind of what he's getting at here, and I understand that. Up next, we have Contrivance, says, should have added many competitive bosses. You like the idea with the new mechanics, though. Talking about Goten and Trunks' bomb mechanic or Gohan's standby mechanic. It's a good idea to change things up. But you're bored of just normal Dokkan stuff. Added question, too hard is the point where it feels unplayable, right? He was in the new like it was during the merge Corrupt Merge Moss came out. You heard that the Broly on release was hard, so Broly Red Zone hard is a hard no. So I'm not sure what he's quite saying here with the last point, but yes, I mean, I know a lot of people were really upset with how they handled Merge Samash. AoE super combo slot 1 made it near impossible to play with anything other than like 3 good teams, and even those teams didn't have a very consistent win rate, because again, if you got a bad starting rotation, or again, you got unlucky and you got the AoE super combo pre-super, you were done for. The event was over and you didn't even get to play it. So I mean, I definitely agree. That is where hard becomes too hard, because the event is literally unplayable for most teams you would want to run. So I could see that. Gogeta, adding on to his previous comment, right, would like to say that people are way too focused on only using the new units and contents when there's infinite content and almost infinite characters to use in it. That's a good point, right? When you look at it only from the perspective of, the brand new units, it does seem rather easy. Broly is beyond a reason powerful, but take it from somebody who didn't use Beast Gohan or Kamehameha Gohan on the Hybrid Saiyans mission. It was actually kind of difficult. The Gohan stage, for example. Tech Ultimate Gohan was taking 300k pre-super in that first, in slot 1. Like, it was kind of crazy to see that. It's actually kind of hard for units outside of those new units. Even then, like on stream recently, I tried to take Future Saga into the Gohan stage, and we got wiped several times because they actually hit kind of hard. It's not as easy as it sounds, unless you're using those big characters. So I think that's important to note, right? From Kellyman, in this year's WWDC, there wasn't difficult content. There was only one semi-difficult event, the Stage 2 with Broly with Super Saiyan Goku. I did not expect them to go hard with the Supreme Magnificent Battle. You were scared when you saw Resurrected Warrior missions. The last 2 was like, man, even the missions was first try. You were scared at first because you didn't know how hard they would hit, and then you checked. It was disappointing, very disappointing, the content this year. The difficulty farming manually. I'm not sure quite what he means by content this year. I think specifically in terms of worldwide. Again, I can see why it does seem easy when you're using the brand new units, but again, step outside of that and things change a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Compared to Anniversary Jump, compared to Tanabata Jump, it wasn't as significant. So it does feel easier than events prior. There's no denying that. Where are we at? Okay, from Zapture, as a newish Dokkan player, you can say you've seen a combo of fun and new units and stages offer fun challenges to spice up the gameplay. With such good units, we've been seeing a lot more laid-back stages in comparison to old hard stages in their prime. You feel they may ramp up the difficulty it's had for most players without most meta teams. This worries me a bit since Dokkan sees players easily passing through these levels, and they will bump the next ones by 10 times. Which will create artificial numerical difficulty that focuses on mind-numbingly difficult. Something is, and not how much fun you might have with the challenge. That will require you to get the newest and best units money can buy. And having a red zone is fine, but it's important not every stage needs its own red zone equivalent. You hope to see new fun stages stay hard with a few hard ones and offer some challenges that not turn into torture chambers. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to bring up, right? Not every event has to be the new hardest red zone stage. The more it is, the more of these we get, right? It does add variety, that's for sure, but it could end up increasing difficulty too fast where it's just artificial difficulty, meaning they're just inflating the numbers, and sometimes it could get to a point where you have no reasonable defense against it. And so I can definitely see that, right? And again, I think it's important to note that the difficulty is not really there for newer teams, but if you try some older teams, there is a significant challenge, right? The challenge in the Gohan event, for example, is in dealing with 3 buffed up 1 million supers, right? it doesn't seem like much, right, when you factor it all on itself. But consider, right, you have a slot 1 unit that maybe needs a little bit of time to build. Taking a million super slot 1, turn 1, 3 times can actually be kind of rough for a lot of units. So, I mean, there is that to worry about. And again, it was bringing there a little bit of challenge. So, or a variety to the challenge, I think, is what he's trying to say here, which is nice. And again, something to keep in mind: new-ish players have a chance to win and without needing the newest units, and I think that that's important to note too. Moving on, let's see what else here we have. Oh, okay, so FreeZen17 posted his from Twitter. So when we get to Twitter, we'll actually just go ahead and read his. Okay, from Dis, the only input is the fights suck, they aren't hard. So I just simply asked up the question, well, how many difficulty fights is necessary, pointing out that we've had, most fights only ever give one good stage, right? And up until 9th anniversary, right? At which we had like 2 or 3 major fights. You could say that 7th introduced 2 major fights with Omega and Broly, but there was a significant gap between the difficulty of Omega and Broly Red Zone. So there, that's worth noting. Moving on. Yeah, I mean, I understand the feeling here from Kelly about having them feel like manual, but I don't think anybody ever got to that point with Fusion Zamasu, and I don't really think it's that. Outside of using the Broly team, I don't really think it's like that. I think that's a bit hyperbolic. But I mean, I do understand it not being as difficult as it could be. Let's see, moving on. Let's try to find some other response here. Okay. So just various conversation here. All right. Dis just noting that he overestimated how hard the fights should be. And he felt like it was wasted for what was brought to the table. I do understand that. Gogeta is Peak here is bringing up an excellent point. Imagine you pull the new AGL Trunks, the banner unit one, and then you pull, you take him into new content, and he's barely usable because everything is completely aged out, right? He's talking about Oh, he's not talking about the banner unit one. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, he's given a great example, and this is exactly what happened to us on Global, right? We got AGL Trunks, and then shortly, later that year, by the time we got him, JP enters the 9th Annie, and we realized that guy is completely useless there. Like, that was a significant jump. That's that big jump that I was talking about in my framing, right? You basically couldn't run any pre-7th year units against Broly. Like, that's how much of a jump it was. So, that's a great point. And I do think, oh, okay, here we go. Now we're getting some different responses here. So from Ichigo, all right, the content that was a lot, it was real it was dropped, it was real slow, mostly easy. The only challenge was Broly Fight Stage 1. The celebration needed 1 hard content. Everything else was great. Overall, okay, it's just talking about the celebration in general, but mostly focusing on just that we needed more than just the Stage 1 Broly fight, which I agree. The Stage 1 Broly fight was probably the hardest of the bunch. Heart Striker, all right, what makes a good fight a fun fight? It's a moderate amount of challenge, but beatable, not to cause a blood vessel pop. You don't mind that much. The stages aren't too difficult. If anything, feel at peace that the final fight doesn't anger you to no end, right? I think that's what, like, a lot of people forget. That most people were sick of Zamas, right? There were very few people that looked at that fight and went, this is a good fight. We acknowledge that it was a bad fight. But now that we have like 5 or 6 different really difficult fights, people seem to be focusing on wanting that one singular fight like that. And it's really strange. Heartstriker brings up a good point that like good challenge looks like the Gogeta fight, right? That is a really good challenging fight, and I do agree with him there. Moving on, we have Charisma. You'd say the problem with CMZ was that it shredded most of the top units at the time, some newer premium units, both units and EZA. Yeah, and then see, and I think like, I mean, it's almost like I feel like this year could be an overcorrection, right? Last year, the fight was so difficult that even the premium units from last year could barely hang, right? Like if you had a bad starting rotation, like if neither one, like if you were running the Future Saga team and you got double Gohan and Trunks your turn 1, you were gonna die. Or if you had the Blues as your lead, right, and you got both of them turn 2, you were gonna die, right? Like it just, like that doesn't happen with these new stages, and maybe because the difficulty isn't at that level, it feels worse than it is. So I think that's that's a really, really good point. Charisma does mention that he doesn't think we need to go beyond these fights in difficulty, but the WWDC fights were definitely easier than most of the challenging content this year, especially with some of thinks that adding missions could add good challenge. And I think that's where it's at, right? Like we could keep all of the events this year relatively the same, and we wouldn't see much change. And we can just add difficulty through missions. I don't disagree with that. I think that's a great idea. So that is all the responses from Discord. I really wanted to make sure I hit those this time, because we did miss them last time. But now we have the Twitter. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at our Twitter here and look at our responses. So you guys can see here, I posted the same question to Twitter. I simply copy pasted it from Discord because the character limit on Twitter wouldn't allow us. But let's take a look. So first up, we got Nichigo, right? Many of you guys know him, good friend of the channel, right? He mentions that he enjoys challenging content that lets us fully utilize the recently released units and teams. Worldwide 2024 feels too easy, preventing us from maximizing. Yeah, so that's the other side of this coin, right? When the event is too easy, we don't really get to see the max potential of characters like the LR Tech Broly or the EZA Tech Broly or STR Broly. I'll tell you, somebody has been trying to do these grand tours for these units. I have been having a hard time finding a good fight to really push these guys to their limit. I think Greg Daw commented here, well, if he did, we'll hit it again, but he mentions that burst mode, it might be the answer to this, right? Because burst mode is where I was really able to push Broly to his limits, simply because, you could increase the difficulty as needed, right? Give the units more, give the bosses more HP and everything, so that doesn't happen. So Nichigo ends it here though with Go Frieza now. See, I feel like if Global had Go Frieza fight, we might be in a different landscape and maybe more forgiving. But the fact that we don't have one of the hardest fights, I think, really makes this difficult for Global to really wrap their minds around what we're dealing with here. So we also got our good buddy Toon Rami. I always appreciate when he can comment. He really goes out of his way, and I do appreciate that that he does that. So Toon says that overall the content this year has been pretty good about challenging content and EZAs that can serve as replacement for new summon characters, right? I mean, if you missed out, right, that's an excellent point, right? If you missed out on any of the LRs during this celebration, aside from the trio, basically every EZA can replace one of the main Dokkan, one of the main units in one shape, form, or another, right? Like if you got LR Tech Broly, you don't necessarily need Int Broly because you can run the LR EZA Broly or the STR Broly. And same if you got LR Int Broly but not Tech Broly, you could just run the LR EZA Broly. Like that's works out, right? It's also a delicate balance that needs to be set, right? Since Golden Week, you think it's been great. I don't know exactly what I want as far as harder content, but as long as it got ample mission variety and incentives to create more teams and different strategies, I don't mind basic Unga Boga adjustments where everyone just hits harder. Power creep this year has been stupidly crazy and feel like we're approaching a point where we need a universal reset on damage and calculations. This brings up a good point, right? Gohan basically being able, like, Gohan and Broly being able to basically max out the damage limit very easily shows that power creep for our units has gone wild, right? Again, consider where we were at 9th anniversary just a month ago. Gogeta had one of the hardest hitting active skill turns. Broly had the hardest hitting active skill turn. Cell Max just above that, him only releasing after 9th anniversary. And now we have Broly, Tech Broly, who on turn 2 throws out a 30 million attack stat. We have LREZA Tech Broly, who can throw out anywhere between a 60 to 100 million attack stat, depending on when you activate his active skill, right? Like, it's just kind of wild how powerful our units have gotten. So power creep has gone kind of crazy. And again, to the point of boss power creep, right? If you were someone who came from, like, Global went from Merge the Moss all the way up to Kid Buu was our next hard fight, and that was nearly that was like nearly 10 months later, right? And then a month later, we get the 9th anniversary content, which was a step above Kid Buu, right? I mean, Kid Buu's hard in his own way, but nowhere near the 9th anniversary content, I feel like. And then a month later, less than a month later, a week later, we got Blue Evolution Vegeta fight, which I would put above some of those other fights over Gogeta and Beast Gohan. So I mean, it's the power creep is real. It's very real. So, you know, I think Toon brings up an excellent point. We just need a way to balance the content, right, with both medium and hard difficulty, so it's not too difficult. Moving on, we have DBC Link. Shout out to him for responding. Even though they don't release the new hardest fight, you would like fights to at least be challenging or unique. These only had a couple of new mechanics, and the fights that did have them were piss easy. Again, I don't necessarily agree with that. If you run just the new units, yeah, it does feel really easy, but as you guys saw in my videos where we tried it without the new units, there's a tad bit of challenge. The Goten and Trunks, I think you know what, I'll save that for the end. I'll come back to that. But I mean, there is challenge. It just depends on how you build the team, right? Epic Memes, shout out. We feel that this year may have made the units too strong. The events are extremely easy and have little difficulty when using teams like superheroes, for example. We kind of like it because it's basically saying if you want difficulty, bring units you enjoy. Which I think is that, I mean, they did say that that's what they want us to do. So, I mean, that's a great point. I do like that point. Greg mentions that he likes the difficult content. He thinks it's a good level for majority of units from the last 12 months, which is good. It's been the level in that time, and that just because the new units are on a level does not mean the current content must match that at the expense of the rest of the player's box, right? That's a very good point. Again, we saw this with Broly and we saw it with Merge to Moss, where your boxes are basically invalidated, right? You can have a unit that makes everything piss easy, as Link so delicately put it, but you should still have a fight that's somewhat challenging for the rest of your box, right? No sense in making a fight that only the new units can run in. So I like that. You think that fights themselves are good enough variety, requiring enemies and names per phase. Yeah, so I mean, again, overall, he likes it 6 out of 7. Yeah, so he doesn't mention the burst mode, but he does mention that he feels like burst mode may be the way to counteract this variety. This was in a further conversation we had about the topic. So really good point, right? Just because we have units that make the game easier doesn't mean the rest of the game should be harder necessarily. That you're not able to play with anyone else, right? So that's a great point. Bully McGuire, you think the new hard events should release pretty often? I mean, come on, be honest now. Most hard events aren't that hard. Maybe if you don't have a single modern unit with damage reduction card. I mean, this is a lot of players, right? We have to remember, right? The events have to be relative to a lot of players, but it's not simply just having these things. I want to point that out here. It's not just having a unit with damage reduction dodge guard. Like, it's about having units that work well together and work on teams together. I love Broly's team, but running Broly's team constantly for every event just because that's the easy way to do it is going to get real boring real fast. Even if they made it hard for them, it would, whatever becomes hard for that team would be so hard for any other team to possibly run. Even teams that just released, like the Golden Week teams, right? I mean, that's what kind of Greg is getting at here, right? We don't need to invalidate the rest of our boxes just because they made a unit really powerful. Miko, to be honest, it's way better than last year, the fights we got right now. Gimmicks and variety. You like the power creep isn't going too fast since the new movie Blue Zone we've got right now isn't that challenging. 1v1 lone, Dokkan hasn't, because it hasn't modernized in this direction by gacha standards, doesn't really have meaningful content besides difficult content. You say at least one reasonably challenging fight per end of celebration, even if they started doing burst modes for red zone. So I like this. I feel like this is the way to go, the burst mode for red zones. I don't know if I necessarily agree with one per celebration, right? Filler celebrations don't really need that. But, I mean, so far, if we consider every major celebration, we've gotten more hard fights in this year alone than we've got in the last 4 years. So, something worth noting. You think the hardest WWDC fight should have been on the level of the hardest fight out currently, which is Goku and Frieza. I think the next hardest fight should be for Annie and then Tanabata. And WWDC kind of keep it the same level of difficulty. This year's fights are too easy. Unorthodox opinion, but you never play the hard content when it comes out. The RNG and rewards not being worth it. You hate power creep because it makes 80% of cards unplayable. You want to challenge and play some games better than last year, though. Yeah, so you know there's different reasons for challenge. All right, so Tech Pan. The start of this year's difficulty in content was crazy. The fights in 2023 felt nothing like the fights in 2024. It's insane, but it took me so long to beat memorable battles with Broly. You think every major celebration should drop the next hardest fight because then players can hop into the new content and use teams for the celebration. Unfortunately, this WWDC, we didn't see that. While I think some of the new fights are somewhat challenging, they don't really feel like it with the new units we have are insane. All right, so drop a unit like Tech Broly and drop a bot that's doing 1.5 million on their 5th phase, and also Global not having Goku, Frieza, Bulma, and Al. Yeah, so I want to point out that it isn't 1.5 million in the 5th phase. Gohan actually does 1.9 million, and if you take more than a second appearance to kill him, he gets an extra 50% damage. So not that you can't kill him in that turn, but again, if you're using the new units, yeah, of course you will. But if you're using other units, you're going to run into some problems there. So I want to point out that it isn't 1.5 million exactly. That I don't know how that number came up and why people... I almost feel like that came up because of a screenshot that was mis-screenshotted without showing the rest of the fight. Because it isn't simply just 1.5 million, right? Consider that, what I want to point out is like, the first stage, somebody mentioned it in the Discord, the first stage of the Broly fight actually deals a 4 million super AoE. Just throwing that out there, right? If you have a Goku on your team. So just something worth considering. But I do agree, as a whole, the fights are very easy for the new units. Funny name, Blue Zones were perfect in terms of difficulty content. Goku Frieza was a little much. The stunning and disabling attack is the best that they've done. Pikmin Obsession Ron, this celebration just sucked. The fights weren't even hard. You felt like something could have released last year. You're fine with Gold Frieza still being the hardest fight. It's only 2 months old, but they should at least be comparable to like the Evo Cannon Blue Zone. Zapture, okay, already mentioned this in Discord. Frieza 17, already mentioned this. Actually, we didn't read there, so I feel like the lack of difficult content is good here because we went through the 2 biggest, hardest content drops to the point where too much is... Plus, this content feels great for showcases, older units being the main point of celebration. Yeah, good point. Oh, this is... I always forget that he changes his name sometimes. Yeah, okay, guys, so we did read this one. Cheeses, for me, every 4 months should be the new hardest fight, but they should all be hard for different reasons. Just not, oh, the next one hits harder. Okay? And then Kellyman got his. Albany, you think it's a great idea to make fights more difficulty during anniversary major celebrations after fights like similar should be similar difficulty to the anniversary. Yep, I kind of hit that one a couple of times. Yeah, somewhere all fights released of the year should be somewhere around the same. All right, so and lastly here, right, we just want to cover the couple that responded to our community post. So we have Culture, they need to release more medium content. Red Zone is usually too hard for people that don't manage to pull the new strong units, so they don't mind it because it's medium. Ricardo, they released a strong character, but the difficulty of the boss didn't match with them. Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking in there. All right, Vince, you think the difficulty is fine, but the variety of teams to beat it is too small or too niche. I remember the 4th and 5th anniversaries, you had over like 5 viable teams. The only units you pulled, they need difficulty be as it is now, release more easy days to get more units to a competitive level, which I do feel like they've been doing, and I'll hit that more in a second. Rich Smarty Pants, I believe that they've released a lot of fights similar to difficulty in the past 6 months. However, the new fights definitely have made any more unit more than a year old more obsolete. Power creep might be just a little too fast. Just a month and a half ago, doing more than 10 million was impressive, but now we're seeing units do 20 plus. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. Like, we went from Broly's, 18 to 19 million into 25 million being kind of crazy, and then now Tech Broly drops 30 million on his second turn. Hans, they should release tough fights that have a lot of turns in order to be able to use all the abilities, right? So just saying we need more longer fights. More content from Franz, comparable to the Goku Frieza fight. And then Extreme Sergio, you believe you should get power creep difficult every 6 months. The content should be focused around the power of the current year's units, meaning the current years are in danger of getting destroyed. This year did well with Tanabata power jump, the 9th year power jump, but you believe the worldwide is a better place for a second jump. This year's worldwide Supreme Magnificent Battle feels like a joke, and you should not feel like you have complete dominance with over a fight. So now that is all of the responses, and I see kind of a lot of the points being made here, and I think everybody kind of has a great point, but I feel like, and this is kind of the perfect point to jump off of, because I saw this multiple times throughout this video. They should release it every big celebration. They should release it every 4 months, every 6 months. We shouldn't have to stagnate. And it's like, when you actually look at what has happened this year since Fusion Zamos last year, we've actually probably had one of the biggest, the most amount of content we've ever had in years prior, even entering in from the 7th year, right? If we go from so Fusion Zamos to JP Annie, right? That was, I would say that was maybe, well, actually, let's throw New Year's in there, right? So Fusion Zamos to New Year's, that's 3 months, right? Roughly 3 months. Fusion Zamos to JP Annie, 4 months. JP Annie to Golden Week was 3 months. Golden Week to Global's Annie was 1 month. Golden Week to Tanabata for JP was less than a month. Tanabata to Peppy Gals, again, less than a month. Global Annie to Tanabata Part 1, which we got, was literally a week after anniversary. And then from Tanabata and Global's Annie to Worldwide, we had about a month. So realistically, they have met that. They have been releasing the most difficult fights we've had in Lord knows how long, all in pretty quick succession. So I never really understood this idea that people are acting like we haven't gotten new content, right? There are, within this span, there are at least 5 to 6 fights that you can all say are within talk for a hardest fight, all for different reasons, right? You have Cell Max, you have Bulma, you have Gogeta, you have Beast Gohan, you have several different Blue Evolution, you have Goku and Frieza, right? All of these fights have claim to one of the hardest fights, all for different reasons. So it makes for great opportunities to showcase various different units. Does it really matter to me if one set of fights, the worldwide fights, and this assumes that they're not done, right? We don't even know at this point if we might be getting another stage to coincide with the Goku, or the Gogeta and Janemba that are going to be EZAing soon. We very well may get a Gogeta fight that's on beyond all of these, right? We don't know yet. But even if we don't, with all of the fights mentioned previously, is it that big of a deal that one's a dud? Right? So as a global player, right, consider, so people mentioned this several times also, right? Consider a global player who came during Anniversary, or just from Anniversary in general. We went from Gogeta and Broly being some of the strongest units in the game, hitting some of the highest attack numbers we've seen in a very long time, to almost triple that with the Brolys and what the trio is doing for some other units, right? It's just wild how powerful the Broly team is now. So, global players saw a huge jump. Imagine what would have happened if this new fight was beyond all of these fights and you summoned on Annie. That would be the worst thing. They would consider this from a business perspective. To me, that would have turned off a lot of players if you spent all of those stones for Tech UI, for Gogeta, for Broly, for Beast Gohan, for the Gammas, and within a month they were rendered completely useless. As someone who did that last year for the 8th anniversary and then into Worldwide, it was the most frustrating experience, to the point where I almost didn't want to make Red Zone videos because of how just plain unfair Zamasu was, rendering our entire boxes useless. Nobody wants that. Right now, where the current content is, not only can all of our best units be used, but even some units that currently that were previously not seen as usable during the previous meta. So I really do think we're in actually a good place despite that. Toon kind of hits it right on the head, right? We've been in the best place we've been in for a while in terms of difficult content. It's difficult. There's plenty of difficult options, but it's not stupidly crazy like years prior. The units themselves are crazy, challenging, but they're crazy powerful, but the new events aren't necessarily, right? We've pretty much maxed out, I think, at Go Frieza for the year, and I'm okay with that. And I hope that a lot of people can see it from that perspective, given all of this, because, again, 5 to 6 major fights this year, all in challenging for the hardest fight. To me, it doesn't seem that big of a deal if one's a dud. And again, that is to say we don't even know if we're getting a final stage. But I appreciate all of the responses. I think everybody, is entitled to what they believe about difficulty challenges. I think it's important to remember where we actually were as global players in terms of getting this new content. We got a crap ton of content within a very short period of time. So I think we got to remember that. But I understand people not feeling at ease with their new Broly having 0 challenge right now. I totally understand that. And so I hope we do get something soon in the near future that will provide enough of a challenge for Broly without eliminating the rest of our boxes, as like Greg and a few others had pointed out. So, guys, that is it for the video. That is my thoughts on the difficult content, and that is all of your thoughts on the difficult content that has come this year. Again, my big thing is I don't want power creep that invalidates our boxes within a year. I think that is too fast for me, and it seems a lot of you do agree. This celebration did leave a bad taste, it seems, in a lot of people's mouths. So hopefully that can be fixed in the future. But I loved hearing from each and every one of you, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And in the comments down below, let us know if you didn't get covered in this video, or if you had your thoughts covered and you want to share a little bit more. Let us know in the comments down below. Share, please. We're all about hearing it. I loved hearing from each and every one of you, and we hope to do this again soon. If nothing else, guys, thanks for watching, and aloha.